My name is Carol, I'm 68 years old, and my own son and his wife stole my home and left me on the street. Before I tell you about how I took back everything they took from me, and more, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all came to a head at a place called La Trattoria. You know the type. Checkered tablecloths, candles stuck in old wine bottles, the smell of garlic and oregano so thick you could taste it in the air. My son, Mark, and his wife, Tiffany, had insisted on taking me out. Just a nice family dinner, Mom, Mark had said on the phone, his voice dripping with a sweetness that had started to sound like poison to me. We need to talk about some family things. I knew what that meant. For the past 6 months, family things had meant their things. Their problems. Their needs. I sat there stirring the ice in my water glass watching them. Mark, my only child, looking handsome in a crisp blue shirt, avoiding my eyes. And Tiffany, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, giving me that bright, brittle smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. She was talking about her new promotion at the real estate agency, something about closing a big sale. I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the proud mother-in-law. But inside I felt a knot of ice forming in my stomach. They were softening me up. The expensive wine, the talk of their success, the faux concern about my health. It was all a prelude. I could feel it in my bones the same way you can feel the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. Finally, after the waiter cleared our main courses, Mark cleared his throat. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. It felt clammy. Mom, he began, his voice low and confidential, as if he were letting me in on a wonderful secret. Tiffany and I have been talking. With her promotion and everything, we're going to be saving up for a new house. It's a fantastic opportunity. I just looked at him waiting. Tiffany jumped in, her voice all syrupy enthusiasm. What Mark is trying to say, Carol, is that we just need a little help to get on our feet. A temporary thing. I pulled my hand out from under Mark's. The ice in my stomach was spreading through my veins. Get to the point, Mark, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the restaurant's chatter. He flinched. He looked at Tiffany, who gave him a sharp little nod. He turned back to me, that charming smile plastered on his face again. Mom, he said, laughing it off as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Tiffany and I just need to stay at your place for a little while until we get things sorted. It's not a big deal. The apartment is too big for you anyway. Tiffany chuckled, a sound like glass breaking. Exactly, she chimed in. We'll be out of your hair before you know it. There it was. The final outrageous demand. They acted like they were asking to borrow a cup of sugar, not asking to invade the last sanctuary I had left in the world. The home my late husband and I had built together. The place where every corner held a memory. For a moment the room tilted. The faces at the other tables blurred. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. I could have screamed. I could have cried. I could have overturned the table and walked out. But I did none of those things. Instead, a strange, cold calm washed over me. I had been preparing for this moment. I had been rehearsing it in my head for weeks. I slowly placed my fork down on my plate. The small clink of metal on ceramic seemed to echo in the sudden silence between us. I looked at my son, then at his wife. I let them see the emptiness in my eyes. Funny, I said. My voice didn't shake. It was as steady and sharp as a shard of ice. I haven't lived there for 6 weeks. The laughter died in their throats. Mark's smile froze and then crumbled. Tiffany's face stiffened, the mask of pleasantness cracking to reveal the ugly greed beneath. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic in their depths. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Wait, she hissed, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. What are you talking about? If you haven't been there, then where exactly have you been staying? To understand how we got to that frozen moment in the restaurant, I have to take you back 6 months. It started, as these things so often do, with a phone call late on a Tuesday night. I was in my favorite armchair, reading a novel, the silence of my apartment a comfortable blanket around me. The phone rang, and the caller ID showed Mark's name. A little jolt of a mother's worry went through me. He rarely called that late unless something was wrong. Mom! His voice was tight with panic, strained. I sat up straight. Mom, something terrible has happened. My heart hammered against my ribs. Mark, what is it? Are you okay? Is Tiffany okay? We're fine, we're not hurt, but Mom, our landlord, he just sold the building out from under us. We got an eviction notice. We have to be out in 2 weeks. He sounded like he was on the verge of tears. 2 weeks, Mom. We've been looking everywhere, but the rental market is a nightmare. Everything is either snapped up or costs a fortune. We have nowhere to go. The story tumbled out of him, a torrent of frantic details about a greedy developer and a heartless landlord. It sounded awful, and I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? He was my son, my only child, the boy I had raised after his father passed away far too young. My instinct, my deepest programming as a mother, was to fix it. Oh, Mark, that's terrible, I said, my mind already racing. Of course, you can't be on the street. I don't know what to do, he whispered, and the sound of his voice, so small and defeated, broke my heart. We just need a place to land for a little while. Just a few weeks, Mom. A month at the absolute most. Just until we can find a new apartment. What else could I say? Of course, Mark. You and Tiffany can stay here. We'll make it work. The relief in his voice was a palpable thing. A wave of warmth that flowed through the phone and soothed my own anxiety. Oh, Mom, thank you. You're a lifesaver. We owe you big time. A few days later, Tiffany arrived with the first carload of their things. She stood in the doorway of my 2-bedroom apartment, the one Robert and I had bought 30 years ago, and her eyes swept over everything. I saw a little wrinkle of distaste form between her eyebrows as she looked at my comfortable, lived-in furniture, the photos of my husband on the mantel, the bookshelves overflowing with the novels I'd spent a lifetime collecting. It's cozy, she said, the word sounding like an insult. I ignored the sting. Let me help you with those, I said, reaching for a heavy-looking suitcase. She pulled it away. I've got it. The first week was awkward but manageable. They were mostly quiet, keeping to the guest room. But then the small things started. Little territorial markers. Her expensive face creams colonizing my bathroom counter. Mark's golf club suddenly appearing by the front door. I tried to be accommodating. I reminded myself it was temporary. Then one morning, I went to my jewelry box to get the gold locket Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. It was my most treasured possession. I wore it every single day. But it wasn't there. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. I searched the box, my hands starting to tremble. I tipped it over, its contents spilling onto my dresser. Nothing. I checked the floor under the bed. It was gone. My heart was pounding when I walked into the living room. Tiffany was on my sofa, scrolling through her phone. Mark was in the kitchen making coffee. Has anyone seen my gold locket? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The one with the heart shape? Tiffany didn't even look up from her phone. Nope, she said, popping the pea. Mark came out of the kitchen holding a mug. A locket? I don't know, Mom. Where did you last see it? In my jewelry box, I said, my voice rising with a frantic edge. It's always in my jewelry box. He shrugged, taking a sip of coffee. Well, it'll turn up. You probably just misplaced it. I did not misplace it, I insisted. It's very important to me. Tiffany finally looked up, her expression one of pure annoyance. Carol, it's just a piece of jewelry. Don't make a big deal out of it. I'm sure it's around here somewhere. It's not just a piece of jewelry, I said, my voice trembling now. Robert gave it to me. Mark put his arm around my shoulders. It felt heavy and false. I know, Mom. We'll keep an eye out for it. But don't get yourself worked up. You're getting to that age where you forget things. He said it with a little laugh as if it were a joke. But it wasn't a joke. Felt like a slap in the face. They weren't just dismissing my concern, they were dismissing me. They were dismissing my memories, my love for my husband. I looked from my son's placating smile to my daughter-in-law's bored indifference, and for the first time, a sliver of ice lodged itself in my heart. I should have listened to that feeling. I should have recognized that missing locket for what it truly was. Not an accident, but the first shot in a war I didn't even know had been declared. The few weeks they needed bled into a month and then 6. The lie of it became the new normal. A silent agreement we all pretended wasn't happening. Their things were no longer confined to the guest room. Tiffany's designer clothes pushed my simple blouses to the back of the closet. Mark's paperwork for his side hustles spread across the dining room table. the table where I used to sit and do the crossword puzzle every morning. My home was no longer my own, it was occupied territory. The worst part was Tiffany's redecorating. She called it updating and decluttering. I called it erasing me. One afternoon I came home from my volunteer shift at the library to find a stack of cardboard boxes in the hallway. My treasured collection of porcelain birds, each one a gift from Robert from his travels, was gone from the mantelpiece. My breath caught in my throat. Tiffany, where are my birds? She walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Oh, those? Pack them away. They were collecting so much dust and they're really not my style. I thought we could give the living room a more modern, minimalist look. Your style? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. But this is my living room. She gave me a tight, patronizing smile. Well, we all live here now, don't we? We have to compromise. The next day, she took down the framed photos of Robert and me from the walls. Our wedding portrait, a picture of us holding a newborn Mark, a snapshot from our last trip to the coast. She replaced them with abstract art prints in black frames, things that looked cold and sterile. The boxes filled up. My books, my photo albums, the Afghan my mother had knitted for me. Each item she packed away felt like a part of my soul being put into storage. My life was being systematically dismantled and labeled old stuff. Mark was a ghost. He left for meetings early in the morning and came back late at night, long after I'd gone to bed. When I did manage to catch him, to ask him when they were planning on finding their own place, his eyes would dart away. We're looking, Mom, I promise, he'd say, already moving toward the door. The market is just brutal right now. You wouldn't believe the salary requirements. He'd talk about needing a promotion, about a college fund they needed to start for a child they didn't even have yet. It was always another excuse, another delay. He made me feel like I was the unreasonable one, the selfish one, for wanting my home and my life back. Now I know some of you are probably sitting there, shaking your heads thinking, Carol, why didn't you just put your foot down? Why didn't you tell them to get out? And you have to understand, you have to try. He was my son. My only son. There's a part of a mother's heart that refuses to believe the worst of her child. You see the man standing in front of you, but you also see the little boy who used to hold your hand, the teenager you taught to drive, the young man you were so proud of at his college graduation. You make excuses. You tell yourself it's a rough patch. You tell yourself that your job is to help them, because that's what family does. You lie to yourself over and over until the lies become a cage. One evening I found Tiffany in the kitchen, on the phone with one of her friends. She was laughing. No, it's perfect, she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. We've got it made. Rent-free, a great location. We're never leaving. She turned and saw me standing in the doorway. The laughter froze on her face. For a split second I saw pure, unadulterated contempt in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that sickeningly sweet smile. Oh, Carol. I was just telling Jennifer how wonderful it is to be spending so much time with family. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, the sound of her words, "We're never leaving," echoing in the sudden heavy silence of the room. I knew then. I knew it wasn't about a tough rental market or a temporary setback. This was a hostile takeover. But what I didn't know was that they weren't just planning to stay. They were planning to own it all. And they already had a plan in motion to make that happen. The days that followed that phone call were filled with a quiet, simmering tension. Tiffany was overly polite, her sweetness so artificial it made my teeth ache. Mark was even more scarce than before. The apartment felt like a pressure cooker, and I was trapped inside with the heat slowly being turned up. I started spending more time out of the house, taking long walks, sitting in the park, just to be able to breathe air that didn't feel thick with their presence. About a week later, Mark caught me as I was coming in the door. He was waiting for me in the living room, a thick manila envelope in his hands. He had on his sincere face, the one he used when he was about to ask for something big. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, gesturing to the sofa. "It's important." A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. I sat down warily on the edge of the armchair, my purse still clutched in my lap. He sat across from me, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Mom, Tiffany and I have been really worried about you." I blinked. "Worried about me? Why?" "Well," he said, sighing dramatically, "you're here all by yourself most of the time. You're not getting any younger. We were just thinking, what if something happened? What if you had a fall, or a medical emergency, and you couldn't make decisions for yourself? The implication hung in the air. You're old. You're frail. You're incompetent. I'm in perfect health, Mark, I said, my voice sharp. I know, he said quickly, holding up his hands. And we want to keep it that way. This is just a precaution, a safety net, for your protection. He slid a stack of papers out of the envelope and placed them on the coffee table between us. The top page had bold letters that made my blood run cold. Durable power of attorney. I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process it. A power of attorney. He wanted legal control. Mark, what is this? It's simple, Mom, he said, his voice smooth as oil. It just gives me the ability to handle your affairs if you can't. To pay your bills, talk to your doctors. It's standard stuff. It just means that if anything ever happens, I can step in and make sure you're taken care of. Tiffany's a real estate agent. She sees these documents all the time. She said it's the responsible thing to do. He was talking so fast, burying the real meaning under a pile of reassuring words like protection, and care, and responsibility. He made it sound like a loving son's duty. But my instincts were screaming. Something was deeply, horribly wrong. I need to think about this, I stammered. Maybe I should have a lawyer look at it. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. A lawyer? Mom, don't be silly. That'll cost you hundreds of dollars. It's just a standard form. See? He flipped through the pages, pointing at blocks of dense, legal text that swam before my eyes. It's all boilerplate. There's nothing to worry about. He pushed the papers and a pen across the table. Just sign here and here. It's for your own good. I looked at his face, at the earnest expression he had perfected, and I felt a wave of confusion and self-doubt wash over me. Was I being paranoid? Was I being ungrateful? He was my son. Maybe he really was just trying to help. Maybe my grief and loneliness were making me see shadows where there were none. He was still the little boy who had cried when he fell off his bike, and I had been the one to kiss his scraped knee and make it all better. Across the hall, I noticed the door to Mrs. Gable's apartment was cracked open. She was a sweet, elderly woman who had lived there even longer than I had. I could just see her eye peeking through the gap. I wondered what she was thinking, seeing me sitting there with my son and this ominous stack of papers. Mark saw me hesitate. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Mom, please, do this for me. It would give me so much peace of mind, knowing I can take care of you. He was weaponizing my love for him. He was using my maternal instincts as a tool to get what he wanted. And God help me, it worked. With a trembling hand, I took the pen. I ignored the screaming alarm bells in my head. I ignored the cold knot of fear in my gut. I told myself I was being a difficult old woman. I signed my name on the lines he pointed to. He beamed, a wide, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He quickly gathered the papers, stuffing them back into the envelope before I could have second thoughts. He leaned over and kissed my cheek. His lips were cold. Thank you, Mom, he said, patting my hand. This is just to protect you. I didn't know then, sitting there in the deafening silence after he left the room, that I hadn't just signed a document. I had signed away my home. I had signed away my security. I had signed my own eviction notice. I had just handed my enemies the only weapon they needed to destroy me. The 2 weeks that followed the signing of that dreadful document were strangely quiet. It was the calm before the storm, though I didn't know it then. Tiffany was almost never home, and Mark continued his routine of leaving early and returning late. I started to let myself believe that maybe I had overreacted. Maybe the papers were just a formality, tucked away in a file cabinet somewhere, never to be used. I allowed a fragile hope to take root. Perhaps things would go back to normal. Perhaps they would find a place and move out, and this whole nightmare would just be a bad memory. That hope was shattered on a Thursday afternoon. It was a crisp autumn day, and I had gone to the grocery store. I remember feeling almost cheerful as I walked home, the bag of groceries rustling, looking forward to a quiet evening with a book. I walked up the familiar path to my apartment building, the place I had called home for 3 decades. I got to my front door and slid my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I frowned, jiggling it a little. Sometimes the old lock was stiff. I tried again. Nothing. It felt like I was pushing it against a solid piece of metal. Confused, I pulled the key out and looked at it, as if the key itself could tell me what was wrong. It was the same key I had used that morning. My heart began to beat a little faster. I knocked. A soft, polite rap at first. "Tiffany? Mark? Are you in there?" Silence. I knocked again, harder this time, my knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. "Hello? It's me, Carol." I waited. I could hear the faint sound of the television from inside. They were home. Why weren't they answering? A cold dread, heavy and sickening, began to seep into my bones. I pounded on the door now, all pretense of politeness gone. "Mark. Tiffany. Open this door right now." Finally, I heard the sound of the deadbolt sliding back. The door opened a few inches. Tiffany stood there, not in her work clothes but in my favorite cozy cashmere sweater that I kept for chilly nights. She had a chain lock on the door. She looked at me, not with surprise or concern, but with a cool, detached curiosity, as if I were a stranger selling magazines. "Can I help you?" she asked. The question was so absurd, so utterly insane, that for a moment I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, at my sweater on her body, at the chain on my door. "Tiffany, what's going on?" I finally managed to say, my voice shaky. "My key doesn't work." "Take the chain off." She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "but I don't think I can do that. This is a private residence." My grocery bag slipped from my grasp, and an apple bounced and rolled down the hallway. "Private residence? Tiffany, this is my home. What are you talking about?" "Not anymore, it's not," she said with a small, cruel smile. "There must be some mistake. You don't live here." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The hallway seemed to stretch and distort. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. I fumbled in my purse for my cell phone, my fingers feeling clumsy and numb. I dialed Mark's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. "He's not going to answer," Tiffany said, her voice smug. "He's in a very important meeting." She started to close the door. "No," I cried, lunging forward, pushing against the door. "You can't do this. Get your hands off the door, or I'm calling the police for trespassing," she snapped, her sweet facade completely gone, revealing the ugly, hard person underneath. She slammed the door shut. I heard the deadbolt slide back into place. And then there was only silence. I stood there in the empty hallway, the smell of my own home wafting from under the door. I could hear the muffled sound of the television again. My television. In my living room. The silence was broken by my own ragged breaths. I sank down onto the floor, my back against the opposite wall, and just stared at the door. My door. The door that was now locked against me. The sun went down. The hallway lights flickered on. People came and went, my neighbors averting their eyes, pretending they didn't see the old woman crying silently on the floor. I was invisible. A ghost in my own building. I, Carol, a 68-year-old woman, a retired librarian, a mother, a widow, was homeless. They had done it. They had taken everything. My son, my own flesh and blood, had conspired with his wife to throw me out onto the street. Sitting there, in the cold, sterile hallway, I felt something inside me break. It was a clean, sharp snap. But what grew in its place wasn't despair. It was something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. It was resolve. I don't know how long I sat there on that cold linoleum floor. An hour? 2? It felt like a lifetime. Eventually, Mrs. Gable peeked her head out of her door. Her face was a mask of worry. "Carol, dear," she whispered. "Are you all right?" I must have looked like a wild thing. I pushed myself up, my knees aching, and tried to muster some dignity. "I'm fine, Martha," I lied, my voice hoarse. "Just a little misunderstanding with the key." She knew it was a lie, but she was too kind to say so. She just pressed a $20 bill into my hand. "For a taxi, dear. You shouldn't be out here." That small act of kindness was the only thing that kept me from shattering completely. I took the money and walked out of the building I had called home for 30 years without looking back. I spent that night in a cheap, anonymous motel on the edge of town. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. I lay on the stiff, starched sheets and stared at the water-stained ceiling. There were no tears left. The shock and the grief had burned themselves out, leaving behind a hollow, frozen emptiness. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? That my son had locked me out of my apartment? They would call it a domestic dispute, a civil matter. I knew instinctively that Tiffany would show them the power of attorney I had so stupidly signed. They would see her as the one in control, and me as a confused, hysterical old woman. They had planned this. They had insulated themselves with a wall of legal paper. Lying there in the dark, I felt the ice in my veins begin to solidify. The hollow emptiness started to fill up, not with sorrow but with a cold, clear rage. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. They pictured me weeping, helpless, defeated. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten that I was not just a sweet old lady. I was a survivor. I had nursed my husband through his final illness. I had raised a child on my own. I had faced down loneliness and grief and kept going. This was just another battle. And it was a battle I had no intention of losing. The next morning I didn't cry. I got up, took a shower and got to work. My first priority was to disappear. They expected me to be rattling at their door, making scenes, calling relatives. I would do the opposite. I would become a ghost. I used the last of my emergency cash to rent a small furnished room in a boarding house in the next town over. I paid month to month in cash. No lease, no paper trail. My second priority was to find an army. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. They had the law, or a twisted version of it, on their side. I needed my own champion. I remembered seeing a flyer at the library for a nonprofit organization called Senior Legal Advocates. They offered free legal services to the elderly. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. The office was in a small, unassuming building downtown. The woman who greeted me at the front desk was a young lawyer named Sarah. She had fiery red hair pulled back in a messy bun and the most intense, intelligent eyes I had ever seen. She led me into a small, cluttered office and listened, without interruption, as my whole sordid story came pouring out. I told her everything. The lies, the missing locket, the redecorating, and finally the power of attorney. I expected pity or maybe even skepticism. Instead, when I finished, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes that looked a lot like my own cold rage. She tapped her pen on the legal pad in front of her. "They didn't just lock you out of your home, Carol," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Based on what you've told me, and the timing of this power of attorney, I believe they've committed a felony. It's called elder financial abuse. And it carries serious jail time." She looked me straight in the eye. "They think because you're a senior you're weak. They think they can get away with it. But they're wrong." She leaned forward, a fierce smile playing on her lips. "This is not going to be a simple eviction case. This is going to be a war. Are you ready to fight?" For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. It was a tiny flame in the vast, cold darkness, but it was there. I looked at this young, determined woman who was ready to go into battle for me. A total stranger. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I'm ready." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Sarah was a force of nature, a whirlwind of legal motions and righteous fury. Our first step was to operate in the shadows. "We don't want to tip them off yet," she explained, her office piled high with law books. "Right now they think you're gone. They think they've won. We're going to use that arrogance against them." Our first move was a subpoena for Mark and Tiffany's bank records. Sarah told me it was a bit of a fishing expedition, but her hunch was strong. "People who do this," she said, "are usually drowning in debt." She was right. When the records came in, we spread them out on her conference table. It was a roadmap of financial desperation. Maxed out credit cards, a car loan they were behind on, huge withdrawals from ATMs at casinos an hour away. They were living a lifestyle they couldn't possibly afford on a real estate agent's salary and Mark's vague consulting work. They were hemorrhaging money. "Here's what we're looking for," Sarah said, her finger tracing a line on a statement. "A large unexplained deposit around the time they locked you out. And then we found it. A wire transfer into their checking account for $150,000. My breath caught. Where did they get that kind of money?" Sarah's face was grim. She was already typing furiously on her laptop, pulling up public property records for my address. There's only one way they could get a lump sum that big, that fast, using your property. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, she turned the screen toward me. The words swam in front of my eyes, but I saw them clearly enough. A lien had been placed against my property. My property, which had been fully paid off for over a decade. They had taken out a reverse mortgage. I felt sick. But how? The apartment was in my name. I would have had to sign for that. You did, Sarah said softly. When you signed the power of attorney, you gave Mark the legal authority to act as you. He could sign contracts, take out loans, even sell the property, all in your name. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was like a physical blow. It wasn't just that they had stolen my home. They had stolen my name. They had stolen my financial security, the nest egg my husband and I had worked our entire lives to build. That money was supposed to be my safety net for the rest of my life. It was my inheritance to leave for my grandchildren, if I ever had any. Now it was being used to fund their gambling trips and designer handbag purchases. But Sarah wasn't done. If they're this brazen, she muttered, more to herself than to me, they're sloppy. She made a call to the condo association that managed my building, posing as a paralegal from a firm handling my estate planning. She asked for a copy of the payment ledger for my unit, citing a need to verify records. The woman on the other end was happy to oblige. The email arrived a few minutes later. Sarah opened the attachment, and we both stared at the screen in disbelief. They hadn't made a single condo fee payment since the month they moved in. Not one. They were 3 months behind, already racking up late fees and interest charges. Sarah printed the document, the pages warm from the printer. She held it up. This is our leverage, Carol. This is the key. They aren't just defrauding you. They're in breach of the condo association's bylaws. And that gives us a whole different angle of attack. We had it all now. The bank records showing their debt. The fraudulent reverse mortgage. The proof that they weren't even paying the basic bills to maintain the property they had stolen. It was a complete picture of greed, deceit, and breathtaking arrogance. Sarah gathered all the documents into a thick, heavy folder. She placed it squarely in the middle of her desk. It didn't look like a legal file. It looked like a weapon. They thought they were smart, Sarah said, her eyes flashing. But they just built their own prison. And now we're going to hand them the key. The worst part wasn't even the financial ruin. It was the calculated cruelty of it all. They hadn't just seen an opportunity. They had created it, manipulating my love and trust to serve their own greed. The sickness I felt was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The evidence was irrefutable, but the emotional damage felt like a life sentence. With our arsenal of evidence complete, Sarah shifted from investigator to warrior. It was time to go on the offensive. We have 2 fronts in this war, Carol, she explained, pacing in front of a whiteboard in her office where she had mapped out our entire strategy. The first is criminal. The second is civil. We're going to hit them on both fronts at the same time. Her first stop was the district attorney's office. She scheduled a meeting not with a junior prosecutor, but with the head of the elder abuse unit. We walked into a large, formal office and I felt a tremor of fear. This was real. This was beyond a family squabble. It was now a matter for the state. I sat quietly while Sarah laid out the case. She didn't lead with emotion. She led with facts. She placed the thick binder of evidence on the prosecutor's desk with a satisfying thud. This is Carol, she began. And this is what her son and daughter-in-law have done to her. She walked him through it, piece by damning piece. She showed him the timeline, from the initial sob story to the signing of the power of attorney just days before they locked me out. She presented the bank statements, highlighting their mountain of debt. She pointed to the huge deposit from the reverse mortgage, a loan taken out against a paid-off property owned by a senior citizen. The prosecutor, a stern-looking man named Mr. Davies, listened intently, his expression growing darker with every page Sarah turned. When she was finished, he closed the binder slowly. He looked over at me, his eyes softening for the first time. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice grave, "what you have endured is unconscionable. This isn't just a case of stolen money. This is an attack on the most vulnerable members of our community. We take this very, very seriously." He assured us his office would open a full investigation immediately. Walking out of that building, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just my fight anymore. The law was finally on my side. Now I know this part of the story, with the lawyers and the legal documents, can sound complicated and slow. And believe me, there were days when it felt that way. It was a journey of 1,000 frustrating steps, of waiting for phone calls, of signing affidavits. There were moments when I felt like giving up, when the thought of facing my son in a courtroom was too much to bear. But Sarah was my rock. She kept me focused on the goal. Justice is a marathon, Carol, not a sprint, she'd tell me. But we will cross that finish line. And for anyone out there going through something similar, please hear me. The journey is hard, but it is so worth it. While the DA's office was beginning its investigation, Sarah opened the second front of our attack. She drafted a formal letter to the board of directors of my condo association. In it, she laid out the facts. That the legal owner, myself, had been unlawfully barred from the property, and that the current occupants, Mark and Tiffany, were in severe violation of their bylaws due to non-payment of their monthly fees. She attached the payment ledger showing their delinquency. The response from the condo board's lawyer was swift and furious. They had been trying to contact the owner about the late payments for weeks, with no response. They were on the verge of starting foreclosure proceedings. Sarah's letter was the spark that lit the fuse. The trap was now fully set. The criminal investigation was quietly moving forward. The civil process to reclaim my apartment was now in the hands of the condo association's powerful legal team. Mark and Tiffany had no idea what was coming for them. They were still living in my apartment, drinking my wine, sleeping in my bed, secure in their belief that they had gotten away with it. They thought I was a sad, defeated old woman who had simply vanished. They had no idea I was marshaling forces that would bring their entire world crashing down around them. All the pieces were in place. All the dominoes were lined up. All that was left was for the first one to be pushed. And I knew exactly when that was going to happen. It would happen when Mark and Tiffany, growing bold and arrogant in my absence, finally reached out, not to apologize but to demand even more. I knew the call would come. I was just waiting for the phone to ring. And then one evening it did. The call I had been waiting for. It was Mark. His voice was smooth, cheerful, as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't left his own mother homeless 6 weeks earlier. "Mom, I was just thinking about you. How are you doing?" he asked, the picture of a concerned son. I kept my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "What do you want, Mark?" "Well," he said, the fake cheer not faltering. "Tiffany and I wanted to take you out for a nice dinner. To clear the air. We feel like there's been a big misunderstanding, and we miss you." Clear the air. The arrogance was breathtaking. He wasn't calling to beg for forgiveness. He was calling to smooth things over, to manage the situation, so they could continue their lives uninterrupted. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. "All right," I said. "Where?" And so we found ourselves back at La Trattoria, the scene of the crime, the place where this final act had begun. When I walked in, they were already at a table sipping wine. Tiffany was wearing a new silk blouse. Mark stood up to hug me. I turned slightly so his arms just brushed my shoulders. I did not come here for a family reunion. I came here to end a war. We went through the motions of ordering. They kept up a steady stream of bright, meaningless chatter. Tiffany's promotion. Mark's new client. The weather. I let them talk. I sat in silence, a calm, detached observer, just pushing the food around on my plate. I was waiting for my opening. It came just as I knew it would after the main course. Mark leaned forward, putting on his serious, man-of-the-family face. "Mom," he began, "we know things got a little out of hand." "A little?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Tiffany jumped in, her voice oozing fake sincerity. "What Mark means is we never intended for you to be displaced. We just needed you to understand that we have needs, too. We thought you would want to help your family. And now," Mark continued, "we've decided we're ready to let you come back." I had to stop myself from laughing out loud. "You've decided? To let me come back to my own home?" "Well, not to live there, of course," Tiffany said quickly, as if I were being ridiculous. "That wouldn't work. But you could visit. We could have you over for Sunday dinners." Mark nodded eagerly. Exactly. And that brings us to why we wanted to talk. We think it would be best for everyone if you just sign the apartment over to us. For the inheritance. It simplifies the paperwork and that way we can take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a thing. There it was. The final audacious demand. They hadn't just stolen my home. They now wanted me to gift it to them to legally sanction their theft and erase their crime. I looked at them, at their greedy, expectant faces, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a profound, empty pity. I leaned back in my chair. No, I said. Mark blinked. No? Mom, be reasonable. I don't think you understand the situation, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. I looked at Tiffany. You might want to start packing. The condo association has begun foreclosure proceedings for non-payment of fees. The eviction notice should be posted within the week. Tiffany's face went pale. What? That's not possible. Oh, it's very possible, I continued, turning my gaze to Mark. And the bank that holds that fraudulent reverse mortgage you took out in my name? They're recalling the loan. They want their $150,000 back. Immediately. I believe the term is loan acceleration due to fraudulent activity. Mark was stammering now, his face a blotchy red. You can't. And then there's the matter, I said, my voice dropping lower, of the durable power of attorney. The one you tricked me into signing. I paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. I had a very interesting meeting with a Mr. Davies at the district attorney's office. He is extremely interested in cases of elder financial abuse. He finds them unconscionable. The investigation is already underway. The silence in the restaurant seemed to press in on us. Tiffany stared at me, her mouth hanging open, her carefully constructed composure shattered. She turned to Mark, her eyes wild with panic. Then she turned back to me, her voice a shrill, ugly shriek that made heads turn at nearby tables. You can't do this. You wouldn't do this to your own son. I looked at her, at this horrible, greedy woman who had poisoned my family. And then I looked at the pale, sweating man sitting next to her, the man who used to be my son. I stood up, my napkin falling to the floor. I looked down at them one last time. Mark stopped being my son, I said, my voice utterly devoid of emotion. The day he let you lock his mother out of her own home and leave her on the sidewalk. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I left them there, sitting in the ruins of the lives they had tried to build on top of mine. I walked out of that restaurant and didn't stop. I walked past the valet, past the fancy cars, and just kept going block after block, breathing in the cool night air. It felt like the first clean breath I'd taken in 6 months. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt free. The burden I had been carrying, the toxic weight of their betrayal, was finally gone. I had left it on the table with them, along with the bill for their dinner. The aftermath was swift and brutal, a cascade of consequences that they had set in motion themselves. I heard about it not from them, but from Sarah, who received copies of every legal notice. The eviction notice was posted on my old apartment door less than a week later, a bright orange sticker of shame for all the neighbors to see. Mrs. Gable told me on the phone that she saw them moving their things out in the middle of the night, stuffing boxes into the back of their fancy, leased SUV like common thieves. They didn't even have the decency to face the light of day. They were forced to move into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a rundown part of town, the only place that would rent to them with their now destroyed credit. The bank, as promised, came after them for the full amount of the reverse mortgage, $150,000. It was a debt they could never hope to repay. Faced with financial ruin, they had no choice but to declare bankruptcy. Tiffany's real estate license was suspended due to the fraud investigation. Her career was over. Mark's consulting business, which had always been a sham, evaporated. And then came the criminal charges. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence for elder financial abuse, Mark took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. He managed to avoid jail time, but he was sentenced to 5 years of probation, a hefty fine, and 500 hours of community service, which, in a poetic twist of justice, involved delivering meals to homebound seniors. He was now a convicted felon, a label that would follow him for the rest of his life. The news spread like wildfire through our extended family and their social circle. The story they had tried to spin, that I was a confused old woman who had wandered off, fell apart in the face of legal notices and criminal charges. People they had known for years crossed the street to avoid them. They were pariahs, ostracized for their greed and cruelty. They lost everything. The apartment, the money, their careers, their reputation. They had been so desperate to climb the social ladder, and they had ended up in the gutter. Did I feel any pity for them? For Tiffany, not an ounce. She was a venomous creature who had gotten the fate she deserved. But for Mark, for my son. Sometimes late at night I would feel a pang of something. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe never. But a deep, profound sadness for the little boy I had loved. The son I had lost long before I ever lost my home. He had made his choices. He had chosen greed over love, a woman over his own mother. And he would have to live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of his days. I didn't have to lift another finger. The storm I had unleashed had done its work. They had built their house on a foundation of lies, and I had simply kicked out the rotten support beam and watched it all come crashing down. Once the legal dust settled, the apartment was mine again, free and clear. I walked through it one last time with Sarah by my side. Felt alien to me now. The walls seemed to hold the echoes of their arguments, their greed. Tiffany's cold, minimalist decor had stripped it of all its warmth, all its memories. It was no longer a home. It was just a property. What are you going to do? Sarah asked gently. I looked out the window at the familiar Cincinnati skyline. I'm going to sell it, I said without a moment's hesitation. There are too many ghosts here. And so I did. The real estate market was strong, and I walked away with a significant amount of money. The proceeds from the sale, combined with the restitution Mark was forced to pay me as part of his plea deal, meant that for the first time in my life, I was not just secure. I was financially independent. I didn't stay in Ohio. I did something I had always dreamed of doing, something Robert and I had always talked about for our retirement. I packed up the few precious belongings I had left, the photos of my husband, the books I had managed to save, and I moved west. I bought a small, beautiful stucco house in a quiet little town in Arizona. It has a garden filled with prickly pear cacti and brilliant bougainvillea. Every morning I sit on my back patio with a cup of coffee and watch the sun rise over the mountains, painting the desert sky in shades of pink and orange and gold. The air here is clean and dry, and the silence is a peaceful, healing balm. I've built a new life here. I joined a book club at the local library. I've taken up watercolor painting, something I always wanted to try. My paintings aren't very good, but they make me happy. I have friends now, real friends. Women my age who have lived full lives, who have known joy and sorrow, who gather for potluck dinners and share stories and laugh until their sides hurt. They know my story and they have never judged me. They have only offered support and understanding. Sometimes when I'm sitting on my patio in the evening, watching the stars come out in the vast dark sky, I think about Mark and Tiffany. I don't know where they are or what they're doing. I have no desire to find out. They are a part of a past I have closed the door on. The pain of their betrayal will never fully disappear. It's a scar on my heart, a reminder of how deep a wound can be. But I am not defined by my scars. I am defined by my survival. I learned the hardest lesson a mother can possibly learn. That sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who will hurt you the most profoundly. And that blood is not always thicker than water. But I also learned that you are so much stronger than you think you are. You can lose everything and still find the strength to rebuild, to create a new life that is even more beautiful than the one you lost. I wanted to share my story with all of you today because I know I'm not alone. I know there are others out there who have been hurt, betrayed, and taken for granted by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I believe in the power of sharing our truths. My question for you is this. Have you ever had to find the strength to start over when you thought all was lost? Please share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the hope they need to keep fighting. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories of survival and strength. You are not alone.